Hi, John. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you, Raza.
Brilliant. It's great to have you here. As I was mentioning when I was talking to you before, anything to do with film industry and any kind of research regarding the topic, especially which you are researching on, which you will introduce, I am honored to talk to anyone who's being part of this industry. So, how would you like to introduce your research?
Well, I'm published as Jonathan Wroot, but most of my colleagues and my friends just call me John. I'm mainly known for researching into Japanese film and how they're distributed, marketed, and consumed in the UK. I've always been interested in that. I've written in a variety of Japanese films as both a student and a researcher now. That interest has taken me into how Japanese films are distributed and marketed, as I say. That's been the basis of a lot of my research, but through that I've become interested in home media research, which relates to two books that I was published in last year, Cult Media and DVD, Blu-ray and Beyond. That's filtered into some other journal articles, again using Japanese films as case studies to further look at distributing marketing in the UK and how a distributor I've been following for a while, Third Window Films, has actually moved into producing films in Japan as well. That's a free-to-read article online. I think that's Bright Lights Film Journal. People can go and look at. Most recently, interest in Japanese cinema. I mean, it overlaps with, there are so many genres in it, and it overlaps with so many other film categories. Again, because of that research, I was asked for, around this time last year, if not earlier than that, to help co-edit a book, which I'm working on at the moment, called New Blood, on new trends in horror films.
Okay.
So I'm looking at a specific, very tongue-in-cheek, low-budget Japanese film for my case study chapter in that book. That'll be fun. It's fun through the title alone, Bloody Muscle Bodybuilder in Hell. You can just...
And that is a horror film?
That is a horror film, very tongue-in-cheek, low-budget horror film, marketed very interestingly. In the UK, I could go more into that, but that might be the whole podcast, a dangerous tangent to go on any of these case studies. Most recently, though, this just happened yesterday. I got the news that there's a book proposal I want to write because I haven't written a monograph yet, and there's a history of a particular film franchise I'm very interested in called Zatoichi the Blind Swordsman.
Oh, wow.
The franchise stretches across 5 decades of Japanese film history. The current research in samurai within samurai film research, the current literature on the Zatoichi film franchise is very small. Not a lot of pages dedicated to it. And I thought, well, actually, going from what I've known and what I've looked into in the history of the franchise, I think there's a whole book-length project here. So I got accepted by Lexington Books as of yesterday. That happened.
Congrats. That's amazing. So would you be looking into the research regarding the samurais according to...
Yes, I'm familiar with a lot of that already, actually through my master's research that I did at the University of East Anglia, where I also stayed on and did my PhD. My master's project, though, was on... recent incarnations of Shambara films, because samurai films is how they're usually known in the UK, and they're known to be action-packed, but actually what we know as samurai films is called Shambara in Japan, which is the onomatopoeic sound of swords clanging. So to emphasize that they're action-packed films within this wider genre known in Japan as Jidai Geki, which is period drama, basically. So there's lots of different films and stories set in medieval Japanese times. They could be comedies, some are musicals, some are dramas, romances, happen a lot. Variety of different genres. Within that, one particular genre is Shambara, the sword action film.
So samurai culture, I've noticed... whatever I've read also about it, it's completely different if you talk to someone who's a Japanese growing up in Japan and came over here, and then what I kind of thought of samurais. I mean, even the characteristics of the samurai itself have changed within Japan also, and also how it's been projected and slowly has been changed through different films and also anime. So, I mean, I would love to know a little bit more that what have you found out if you...
Yeah, I mean, that's... I know you mentioned earlier as well, you wanted to get into wider discussions of stereotyping and Orientalism in general in Japan, and the samurai is a great example. Yes, you're quite right. There are certain perceptions that are become we become aware of in Western media, of course, because of their representations within films and televisions, or certain examples that come from Japan to the UK, or are, say, homaged or borrowed from in Hollywood films or bigger budget mainstream films. So the image is often just of sometimes these sword-wielding maniacs who are capable of, fatal blows that end up with, blood spurting everywhere. That famous stereotype, very popular recently because this is popular with a lot of my students at the moment. They're big fans of the Kill Bill films that Tarantino made, and the imagery of swords used in that. Even though that's a modern day set story, it's borrowing a lot of that samurai iconography. So that's how it's stereotyped, but that's just one incarnation of the samurai. And there's lots of different ones within Japanese media. As you say, the reality is very different. There have been some interesting films that have dealt with actually the historical reality of the samurai compared to the popular image. I'm just trying to remember. Yeah, the director's name is Yoji Yamada, who directed the films The Twilight Samurai, The Hidden Blade, and Love and Honor. And if you want a more realistic vision of the samurai films, I would recommend you watch those films. They're more historically accurate, kind of revisionist. Kind of in a similar way, the samurai films are also compared to westerns. So these films could be seen as like revisionist westerns that come out sometimes, try to depict the Wild West as it really was, as opposed to the dueling gunslingers that often appears in westerns. There's some samurai films that try to do differently, that to dispel that image, because, as I say, that's what was becoming popular in the West and other countries. Goes along with other famous myths about Japanese culture, like the ninja is often tied up in this. But again, the real ninja was very different. They never dressed in black like ninjas that we know at the moment. That never happened. Ninjas were often disguised as local people and would hide blades in their clothes to suddenly assassinate someone. They wouldn't go leaping over rooftops with their amazing agilities or dressing in black. That's all a myth.
So what is? It would be interesting if we can also plug in some sort of ninja historical facts. If there,
I might have clued. It's not my specialist area. I might have mentioned all I know there, if I'm honest. But it's. I think it's kind of tied to one of those films I mentioned, The Hidden Blade. It's mentioned as a killing technique particular to this samurai clan. It's referenced a lot in the film. It's not an action film, as I said. It's a revisionist historical drama. But part of what this particular samurai clan is known for is for having this hidden blade technique for how they, win their battles, or if tensions arise. And that I think that has some of those popular myths, like, there's a story of a clan that used to have hidden blades in their clothing, and they could use them at a moment's notice if someone got on the wrong side of them. I think that filtered into this kind of ninja concept. I think there may be some. I wouldn't want to be quoted on this, but I'm being recorded. I think there's some historical artifacts that have been found that relate to some of the popular weapons that are seen to be used by ninjas, like the sai knives, the three-pronged scythes, and shurikens. But again, a lot of those and how they're depicted in Western media are very much embellished and are very mythic, not always that based closely on truth.
So as generally, humans anywhere, whatever culture they are from, we are really good at storytelling. We are really good at mythicizing most of our stories because it makes it easier. And then on the top of it, when there is a translation from one culture, which is really alien in a way that it is very far away, then you add another aspect of consumerism, and then you add intrinsic properties of the people who are translating that into convert and somehow try to merge their own stories into whatever was done. So I think, is that also what your research is trying to understand?
That is part of what I'm very much interested in with the Zatoichi films, because the book has been as I say, just accepted for the proposal, which is nice news. But now I've got to write the thing, so we'll wait and see. Wait and see on that. Please don't hold your breath, though. No. But it will get done. It's just a question of when.
Books are books. Anyone who have signed a book deal, they are happy and then miserable.
And they realise the hard work kicks in. Yes. But no, I hope to explore a lot of what you've just mentioned in relation to Zatoichi, because one of the reasons I want to research it, the book series that it will be for, is called Remakes, Reboots, and Adaptations. So within the book I want to write, I'll be charting a lot of the history as it was, the Zatoichi films, where there was one actor, Shintaro Katsu, who played Zatoichi the Blind Swordsman for 26 films, first of all from 1962 to 1973, and then he did a comeback film in 1989. That's seen as a bit of one of these cult classics now. But at the time it was a financial flop, so it didn't work out for him, unfortunately, which is a shame, because in addition to those films, he was prolific as a stage actor and musician. He was a very big celebrity in Japanese culture, but by the 80s his star is fading. And also with Zatoichi, he tried to keep it going after 1973, and he did for a few years on television. He also played Zatoichi in 100 TV episodes. So there are other records held by other actors, especially in Japanese cinema, for playing the same character on screen for even longer amount of time. There's the It's Tough to Be a Man series, also known as the Tora-san series, about a travelling salesman who's always down on his luck and always finds a woman to fall in love with, but then it never works out for him in the end. Kind of these bittersweet, melancholic and also sometimes comedic tales. There's 48 films that actor played as that actor. But I think actually it's a different kind of record that Shintaro Katsu holds. I mean, 100 TV episodes and 26 films as the same character. I think that's its own type of record there.
That is fascinating. Is it to do with the Japanese culture, or is it more to do with what audience they were, or
I think it tells us a lot about audiences at the time, because the It's Tough to Be a Man series, and which went on until the mid, if not early 90s. From like the 1970s, I think it was. That's how long that series ran. That had some overlaps with the Zatoichi series, which was most prolific on screen 1962 to 73. And you have lots of other episodic serial franchises that I could mention, not just within samurai genre, but within lots of other different genres. And as well as at this time, you've got emerging some very popular long-running TV series, some of which are still on TV to this day. Some are animated, some are live action. So this can tell us a lot about Japanese audience taste, liking a lot of these serialized tales, which are often the same story over and over again. You can be critical of I'm fascinated with the Zatoichi films, but you can be critical of them. A lot of them are the same story over and over again with just very slight changes. But the amount that were made, and those TV episodes as well, 26 films and those TV episodes, shows there was an audience. And so some people liked this repetitive nature of those stories, just, spending some time with that character over and over again. So it can tell us a lot about Japanese culture. And also what happened since then is another reason why I want to write about the series. There have been 3 remakes in Japanese cinema of the Zatoichi films, and also there have been some official and some unofficial remakes in other countries around the world, borrowing on this blind swordsman image, and clearly taking sometimes you can clearly see what they're doing. They're not even trying to disguise it, taking this borrowing quite clearly this imagery of the blind swordsman, because it's so popular and the audience is so widespread for it. They think they can use it in their own films, these other filmmakers from other countries.
So is it also somehow related to the myth of their own samurais, or is this
partially?
Okay.
The Zatoichi films are a different take. There are samurais that appear, samurai, sorry to use the correct plural term, that appear in the Zatoichi tales. Now, the reality of the samurai was that they'd be retainers to local lords, the daimyo, in Japanese culture from the 17th century to the 19th century, when Japan had its isolationist policy. So the samurai were retainers to the local lords, who were retainers to the shogun and also the emperor at the time. So the samurai would be kind of like knights, medieval knights. They would be called on in times of battle to, help settle disputes if disputes came up between clans. Although during the Tokugawa era, this time when that was the family that brought about this isolationist policy and this period of stability and peace, as it was believed to be at the time, where there wouldn't be so many feudal lords. They all had to give fealty to the shogun and be loyal during that time, the samurai weren't called on for battle so much. Instead, they were helping with local governance and overseeing, peasants and tradesmen in the area, and they'd be paid salaries through rice or koku. You'd be paid, one koku was meant to be enough rice for a year for a man to live on. So your salary was paid according to that. You could be paid more than one koku a year. And if you had so much more lifetime amounts of rice, or did I say lifetime? I think I meant to say enough rice for a man for a year. I think that's how it was paid. If you had enough of those amounts, you were seen to be hugely rich, depending on how much rice you were given as payment. So they would often help with local governing matters. And so from there, the myth has arisen, because they always walked around carrying their swords. Because of that fact as well, the myth has partly emerged in popular cinema, again, of the action, the crazy samurai wielding maniac that often appears in these films, who could be a good heroic person doing that with his sword, or could be, equally the villain.
I would love to clarify, if we are talking of samurais right now.
Yep.
How it was in 15th century maybe, and then how it changed after 16th century when shoguns got really much power. And then what are the connections it actually created into the different characters which are then being represented, and then you can tell me about the story of the blind sword. That's I'm quite happy to do that, because it does all link together. Before the Tokugawa era, which is, I forget the exact year in the 17th century, but it was the 17th century this happened. There was I forgot who the Tokugawa family were fighting for control over Japan, but this is one of the reasons they set out an isolationist policy afterwards, to bring stability and peace, so there won't be no more of these feuding lords trying to claim so much land from Japan for their own rule, or trying to rule over all of Japan for their own reasons. The family that won out of the Battle of Sekigahara, I think the name is, I've forgotten who was on the losing side of that battle, but the Tokugawa dynasty ran through. Were on the winning side of that battle, established this isolationist policy and this period of stability, because before that, as I've said, it was lots of local lords were in power over different areas of Japan, all fighting for each other, kind of like in medieval kingdoms in the UK and other countries in medieval times, in centuries before that, all fighting each other for power and borders of their territory. So once the Tokugawa family wins out and has control over most of the regions in Japan, they bring about this period of stability. The local lords are in charge. The samurai are their loyal retainers, helping the local lords to oversee governing of the region, and that helps to start off from the top end to the low end, the kind of social hierarchy that's in place in Japan at the time, and this helps to explain where Zatoichi comes in as well. So you have the local, at the absolute top of the chain, you have the emperor, who's more of a symbolic figure at this time, still to this day in Japan, more of a symbolic figure than an influential one. Then you had the shogunate, led by the shogun and his advisors, governing over all areas of Japan. You had the local lords, who were the daimyo. You had the samurai, their loyal retainers. Below that, I believe, next highest on this caste system that Japanese medieval society had were merchants and specialist tradesmen and craftsmen. Then you had the peasants and the farmers. And there were also, at this time as well, they were trying to go against the caste system. You had the yakuza, the gamblers, and some through various corrupt schemes that they got involved in, sometimes involving samurai, sometimes involving other government officials. They could accumulate a lot of wealth and gather and be quite powerful and influential in their own right. But strictly speaking, according to the Japanese caste system, they were quite low down the official food chain, weren't seen as that high in society. And then you have the lowest of the low, the hinin, as they were called in Japan, the kind of non-people in this caste system, and that's people who are disabled, perhaps mentally ill, criminals, but also blind people.
which is where Zatoichi comes in. He's the lowest of the low because he's blind. He's only good for either two types of employment. Now, if you were female and blind, you would usually become a musician called a gozen. If you were a blind man, you could become a musician, but you'd also be expected to be a masseur. That was the only other employment open to you. So Zatoichi, when you're first introduced to him in the films, he's a travelling masseur wandering medieval Japan. Ends up in a different town in every film and TV episode. And that's how his primary source of income is his massage skills. But he often tells the story can slightly vary from film to film, either when Shintaro Katsu's playing him or another actor in the later remakes. He always says at one point he was sick of being treated lower than dirt because of his status, and he kept having people. He never goes into specifics, but he always says like people picked on him and things. So he learnt some sword fighting skills, and not only does he wander the medieval Japanese landscape looking for work, he also hides in his cane a sword, which he is more than capable of using when trouble comes his way. If anyone threatens him, it's a quick draw of his sword, and they've usually lost a limb, if not their life.
I mean, I can see already you explaining that the pull in that story. I mean, all of us, of course, relate to someone who's down and they have this superpower, which they are using not for the benefit either for enhancing their ego or maybe gathering power, but actually to defend themselves and let's say actually prevailing justice in a way. Whatever.
No, he is seen as in a lot of the stories he is defending other people that are downtrodden, and he hears about something going on and doesn't think is right. He often tries his best, but this is how the story is constructed because that's the reason everyone goes to see the film. He might try first of all to find peaceful means to the solution and give good advice, but it all builds up to an excuse for a massive, not so much bloodbath in the early Zatoichi films. That did come later in the 70s, though, when they're trying to bring more audiences in, still bring an audience into the cinema. They did add more blood, and it was more of a bloodbath later, but it's usually just a very action-packed fight scene at the end, with Shintaro Katsu doing very well because he was well practiced at this, at fighting with his eyes closed, because he would depict the blind man as an eyes closed. Some people like to pause the Zatoichi films and try and tell, well, actually, no, you can see his eyes are open there. And that led into a discussion of, with this story, actually, is he blind? Is he just faking it, this character of Zatoichi? But there's been lots of confirmations in some of the Zatoichi films that he is actually blind and he can't read and things like that. But a lot of that stemmed from how Shintaro Katsu played the character, but he did do it very successfully. He practiced a lot, choreographed his sword fight scenes very well, so a lot of what you see on screen is him scaring probably the other stuntsman as he flings a sword around with his eyes closed.
I mean, as we are talking about these characters, as we are talking about Japanese history, and I think most of us maybe have heard of it in some way, in some manner, but as we are getting to know this individual through whatever series anyone has seen or how you are explaining it, it actually tells you the similarities of most of the cultures, which when you realize, and also the common underpinning and the pull of those archetypical stories. If you tell them in a way as you are talking about it, and actually it's a good discourse. Because this is exactly the part of your research which you were talking about. A lot of distribution companies, and they have their own biases. It actually becomes something fantasize and maybe even fetishize in some way, and you put it on shelf, and that's the only thing which you pick up, and then you start to believe in that story. And
exactly, these can become myths that people think are reality in terms of how certain Japanese stories are told. Like it's maybe a bit of an extreme example, but with the Zatoichi films, that you've got to watch for your life wandering around the landscape. It's no telling of who's around the next corner and who's going to suddenly draw their sword and kill you. That's the environment it seems to depict in some of those films. As I say, it's very much an embellishment of the historical reality of the time. But yes, this does also relate to distribution, as you said, and lots of the other points that my research that's already published has touched on. this does relate to wider aspects with other Japanese films and how they've been marketed and come to the UK. You've mentioned in your notes earlier you wanted to explore this concept of Orientalism, and it very much ties into that, how Japanese culture, when Western culture comes into contact with it, whether you're from America, the UK, or even there's quite an appetite for Japanese media in lots of Western European countries. It's seen as something exotic and other. It's exoticized, and that's very much what Edward Said was talking about when he published his work on Orientalism in 1979, and lots of other research that I've come across on Japanese films that's been published since, and I've also touched on this area, says there's still a lot of evidence for Said's theory. Certain aspects of different cultures around the world are orientalized, exoticized, seen as this weird and wonderful other. And where the debate happens is that something because of what happens in Japanese culture, where these things come from, or is it more to do with the marketing and distribution of them? Like the famous example this always relates back to, lots of other researchers got to this first. This is why I haven't been able to write as much on it as some other researchers I know, like Oliver Dew and Chi Shin and Daniel Martin. They wrote about this in relation to Tartan Asia Extreme. A famous UK label from a few years ago, got started in it was a sub-label of the Tartan Video Company. The Tartan Video Company had been going since the 80s, but the Asia Extreme label was particularly famous, went from the late 90s until the whole company unfortunately went bankrupt in 2008, because one of the reasons, it wasn't the only reason, was that they were flooding the market with too many of these Asia Extreme films, because they just thought that's what the British people wanted. More and more of these weird and wonderful films. Lots of them were tied to famous Japanese examples like the horror film Ring, Dark Water, Takashi Miike's Audition, and one of their biggest hits that they did release first was Battle Royale.
Yeah.
And as I said, they just thought, oh, that's what the audience wants, and they decided to tie lots of other countries into this too. Films from Thailand, Hong Kong, and said, oh, we'll give you lots more of these weird and wonderful films, but not every one of them was a success. And I say that's not the only reason, but that's one of the reasons the company unfortunately went bankrupt in 2008. They're still quite influential though, even though the company did go under. Their catalogue is sometimes re-released or picked up by other labels, so every now and again it seems to be a popular audience that is still in particularly in the UK, with the UK public, is there still an audience for this exotic other type film, a kind of Asia Extreme film, whether it's a horror film or an action film. There's still some distributors who don't call themselves Asia Extreme or anything like that, but every now and again they will release one of these films because they know there's still a market out there for it.
So other directors who are actually in Japan or Thailand, I'm not sure. Ong Bak.
Yes.
Yeah, was it a Thai movie? Because it's
that's a Thai movie. Yes.
Yeah.
So a lot of this does relate to the martial arts genre as well, which Ong Bak is a great example of. It introduced the world to Tony Jaa, who's now gone on to star in quite a lot of big budget action blockbusters since. In fact, him and another big up and coming martial arts star now, Iko Uwais, I think his name is, who was in The Raid. He's been teaming up with Tony Jaa and lots of other action stars for lots of other Asian martial arts films. So yeah, Ong Bak is a kind of different example, but showing that these views are akin to martial arts films as well. It's a really good one, Ong Bak. The sequel's not so much, but the first Ong Bak, very good.
It's really good. Even Raid is really good.
Oh, The Raid is brilliant. Yeah, I get my students to watch it. Yeah.
I mean,
for my transnational screens lessons. Yeah.
So these films are made by the directors who are born and lived in that country.
Well, actually, though we've just mentioned The Raid's a bit of an exception. That's directed by a Welshman.
Oh, wow.
Called Gareth. I always get them mixed up with Gareth Edwards. No, Gareth Edwards did Star Wars Rogue One. It's Gareth Evans who directed The Raid. Sorry, I always get those two mixed up. And yeah, he's originally hails from Wales, but he went over to Indonesia to research this particular martial arts fighting style, Silat. And his first idea was to make a documentary about this martial arts style. that he became aware of. But then he found the people that were most knowledgeable on it, and they all wanted to make a fiction film rather than a documentary. So the first one that they made was actually called Morantau, again with Iko Uwais, on a much lower budget, although it wasn't successful, and led to the idea for The Raid. And since then, some filmmaking careers of both Gareth Evans and his actors, and The Raid has also had a sequel. We're hoping for a third one, fans of those first two. But their careers have bloomed ever since.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is second one good? It's on my list.
Oh, have you not seen it yet? Oh, it's very much a
It
watch.
is?
It's one of these sequels. It could be criticised for doing this. It's typical sequel thing. It's much bigger and bloodier than the first one. Gives you a lot more for your money. Some people complained about that, but I thought it was brilliant. It's still a great film, but for different reasons.
I was in my sensitive mood and I started watching it. The first scene is, I think the first sequence is really brutal.
Oh, in The Raid?
I think so. It's Raid 2.
Oh, in The Raid 2, yes.
Somewhere in the fields. And I was like, I know where it is going. I think I might... It's not a good time for me to watch it.
No, you have to be in a certain mood. It's very brutal and bloody,
Okay.
I will say that. It has got a fantastic car chase sequence in it too. Yeah,
You have sold it. Sold it.
It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
So, about these films actually, and I'm of course, one of the first time I saw Japanese anime. Long time ago, I was finishing my bachelor's. I mean, it was not that long ago, but from my perspective, it looks like a long time ago. I think I saw a Japanese anime series, and it was not even that popular one. But as you are saying, that that urge we all have of something strange and wonderful. I think even if you are growing up around those cultures, still, if the story is presented in a way which actually somehow tickles those kind of desires of yours, or not even desires, I would call it like a fundamental curious property of being human.
Yeah.
Is that you love that mysterious tremendum other.
Yeah.
And you want to be terrified by it, but that also give you a feel of being wondrous. I think sometimes these kind of properties are also used by certain media companies, and even and I think it's there's nothing good or bad about it. I mean, that's why we tell stories, so we want to grasp the attention. You have something to say, so you say it, and the audience listen to it. And that's how brilliant directors and storytellers somehow grasp that essence of showing a film. But the thing which I would love to get your opinion on is this thing which we all kind of feel and have for certain different stories and films, and especially when you're watching, for me it would be Japanese anime, and you have this very specific abstract feeling towards which you are also going while you're watching it. It is kind of fundamentally common to most of the people, and you do have it inside of you. But do you think it is what we feel comfortable if we can associate that to other, and then once it's over and once you have seen the film or listened to the story, you come back to who you are, where you are comfortable? Because
so part of the appeal is escaping into that other world, that other culture. Yeah, escapism. Yeah, it's one of the fundamental reasons. Like I'm pretty sure there's books being written on that. The escapism that stories provide, and some people are the appeal is more to some people. Might a story might appeal to them more with the surrounding that they're familiar with and characters they're familiar with, but other people want to escape perhaps different reasons and get lost in an other type of world, an exotic other world. So hence a film from Japan, or even Japan's past, or supposedly set in it. Yeah, that could be one of those reasons, but it's also a lot of my colleagues interrogate this concept of verisimilitude. It's not just enough to have an escapist story. You've also got to have make sure that the audience is willing to suspend their disbelief. That verisimilitude, it's called, making the audience go along with you so that they will, engage with this story. Yeah.
True. And I mean, of course, sometimes you can feel like that you are trying to escape, and then this kind of escapism shows certain part of your own self in that
Yeah.
escapism.
Yeah.
Where some people come back and brought a lot of good things, and some people come back and they don't want to face whatever they found out. Would that actually somehow relate to categorizing and making these kind of concept into that Orientalism which we were talking about, where you actually label these things so it's more comfortable for you to go into that alien parts of
For some people, that could well be the case, that they feel more comfortable going into that exotic othered world more than dealing with, everyday reality and the mundane things. I mean, that could lead to it could be seen as in some ways a kind of a negative stereotype going along with it. This is again relates to the culture immediately in Japan, where fans of Weird and Wonderful, because it is weird and wonderful. I know researchers who specifically focus on anime and manga, and they just admit, oh yeah, some of these titles are just bizarre, really are bizarre. So some of them are, and sometimes the fans were seen in Japan as weird and wonderful as well. It's often a popular phrase used in Western countries now, the otaku, like the dedicated fan, but that was seen as a very negative connotation when it first was used in popular language and or lots of media in Japan when around the 1970s and 80s. If you were seen as an otaku, it was seen as kind of something dangerous, this dangerous obsessive fan. So it could be seen in some negative ways, but there's also some positive things as well. There's people who've been willing to escape into this world and help it shape their lives, and they can actually make a job out of it, especially now that cosplay, that act is becoming so popular now, people dressing up as their favourite anime, manga or video game characters. There are people that have made industries and successful businesses out of that because their style is so popular. The specific skill set that they've developed is actually something that they can commodify.
So coming back, going to Japanese studios, I always pronounce Studio Ghibli, but you said...
some people say Studio Ghibli, but I believe the pronunciation is meant to be Ghibli, purely because it comes from an Italian word. I can't remember the original Italian word, because I think Ghibli is a modification of the original Italian word for wind.
Oh, wow.
Which is pronounced similar to Ghibli, but again, I'm not an expert on Italian either. I can't remember that exact word, but yes, they're a very popular bunch of films from that studio. Yes.
So that studio has used an Italian word, just a coincidence, or is there a link?
I think, Hayao Miyazaki is one of the most famous directors associated with that studio, and he's one of the founding members, along with Isao Takahata, who sadly passed away. I think it was last year. It was very recent. And the word was picked by Miyazaki,
okay,
as well as Takahata, I think, because they had you can see in a lot of their films a fascination with Western countries, and particularly European countries. Italy crops up a lot, so I think that's one of the reasons why they picked this Italian word Ghibli, meaning wind, for their studio.
When I was growing up, I was fascinated by storytelling and films, and a lot of self-destructive pattern of mine might be watching a lot of films, but I actually kind of got a lot out of it. So it averages out.
I'm envious of that. It's I'm lecturing film studies and program leading the degree at the moment, but it gives you a lot of work. You don't always have, annoyingly, in my field, you don't always have time to watch all the films that you want. So I'm very jealous of hearing that.
That was before I started jobs.
Right.
Unfortunately. That was my bachelor's and maybe master's time. Oh, and I had a lack of many sleepless nights just watching a lot of film. But I mean, in all those films which I've watched, one of my top films, one of the films which I'm emotionally also connected still, or the films which actually inspired me in both some of the career moves which I've done, are from Studio Ghibli.
What's your favorite?
I mean, one of the really good ones recently, which is Red Turtle, which is not I mean,
it's not technically,
it's not technically,
'cause
but
yeah.
still somehow
No,
associated.
it was partially financed and produced, I think,
Yeah.
by Studio Ghibli.
Yeah.
But they saw what the director Dudok de
Yeah,
Wit,
yeah.
I think he is a Dutch animator,
Yeah.
was doing with some of his earlier shorts, and they asked him to complete a feature-length film, and it's a really good job. It's a beautiful film, I think.
True.
Yeah. It's
So
good.
what is the influence of that studio, and how does that studio fit into your research, or how's the story?
Well, I must admit, I'm not researching on Studio Ghibli directly. I would refer you to, because they've published some recent research on this, my former PhD supervisor at University of East Anglia, Rainer Dennison, and also James Rendell, who's based at Cardiff. They joined forces and created a wonderful edited collection on Princess Mononoke recently, but also a special edition of a journal. I'm afraid I forget which journal it is, but a special edition all about Studio Ghibli productions. But there are some parallels that I found with my research with what's going on in Studio Ghibli, because again, it's one of those films where they've been much more popular and successful, like some of the Japanese horror films I mentioned earlier, around the world, because some of the Ghibli films now have been winning Oscars, of course. That happened they keep getting nominations from Spirited Away onwards, and Spirited Away got the win for, I forget which one it was. I don't think it was foreign language film. I think it was animated feature.
Wow.
It won.
Yeah, that's big.
Yeah. So Spirited Away won that, and since then, that's helped its marketing around the world. They're not necessarily always marketed as something weird and wonderful from Japan, although there's partially that expectation again because it's anime films. That expectation goes along with that, but they're also like a really popular and almost mainstream. They're often described as mainstream form of category of anime films.
So let's also do some surveys other than Princess Mononoke and Spirited Away.
Yeah,
which are just
they're great. Princess Mononoke is one of my favourites. I'm torn between that one and Nausicaa. That's my favourite. Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind. Yeah.
So that was my actually question. That could you recommend other two? Which
I've said my favourites there, but there are lots of others that are enjoyed. Technically, Nausicaa was released before the founding of Studio Ghibli, so it doesn't actually count. And Miyazaki did some other films which have been kind of released and marketed as Studio Ghibli films, but they came just before. Some of them are really worth a watch. There's The Little Norse Prince, which he did with Isao Takahata, and The Castle of Cagliostro, which involves a famous Japanese anime character called Lupin III, who's seen as this like gentleman thief. He's like a criminal version of James Bond. He's quite a fun character. And then I'm trying to remember what technically was the first Ghibli film. Oh, Raina would kill me if she heard this. After Nausicaa, what did come after Nausicaa? My Neighbor Totoro.
Oh, okay.
That's a really good one. Also, though, it's a wonderfully heartwarming and just happy film overall, My Neighbor Totoro. Released the same year, though, as another notorious Ghibli title, Grave of the Fireflies, which is all about the war and how the bombings of Tokyo are affecting two children in particular. It's just a tragically heart-wrenching tale. That used to get shown on a double bill with My Neighbor Totoro.
Wow.
They would show Grave of the Fireflies first, and this was aimed at kids, and they'd all be in tears by the end of it, so Totoro was the next film in the double bill to cheer them up afterwards.
You mentioning that name, it gives me goosebumps. I still it is.
Oh, it still makes me become a puddle of tears, that film. It's got such power to it.
Yeah, true. I also forgot, because this was interesting in Japanese cinema. I just saw recently, and unfortunately I forgot the name of the film. The story was based on this girl who fell in love with the guy who can turn into wolf children.
Oh, Wolf Children, yes. Well, what's happened since Miyazaki has announced a few times now that he's retiring, but he did this after he released his supposed last film was... Oh dear, I used to teach a class based around this. This is humiliating. What was his supposed last film?
I think it was the Princess and the Mary and the
No,
No.
that was a different director, and that was actually with Studio Ponuk, because
Okay.
Studio Ghibli is technically not making
split.
films
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah.
And there's some of the talent has gone to this other studio that started up called Studio Ponuk. But there's still the Studio Ghibli Museum that you can visit in Japan. That's not going anywhere. It's a massive tourist attraction. The final film that Miyazaki made was about the designer of the Zero airplanes that got used in the Second World War.
Yep.
And this is terrible that
No.
I've forgotten the name of that film.
I do remember watching
Yeah.
the name and the poster of
Yeah.
what you are mentioning. Yeah.
Yeah, and anyway, do you remember the name?
No. I don't.
Okay.
I wish
yeah.
I would.
Yeah,
I would
no,
have
I
mentioned it.
I can remember what the poster looked like. This is terrible of me to forget that name. It's really worth a watch. I don't think it's necessarily one of his best films, but it's really worth a watch. It's a good one. Anyway, he announced that was his last film and he'd be retiring on that. But the latest news is he's, surprise, surprise, working on another film. He couldn't stay in retirement that long.
No, I can't.
And so when that was announced, though, to come back to Wolf Children, sorry, because we went off on another tangent
okay.
there. There have been lots of directors that have emerged since who have been touted as the next Miyazaki because they've become so popular. There's been Makoto Shinkai, who did Your Name and some other big anime films before that. Your Name was a massive success recently. It broke all sorts of records in Japan and got people wondering, is this the next Miyazaki? Because it's such a popular anime film. And the other director being talked about in that way is the director of Wolf Children. And this is, again, quite embarrassing because I've forgotten that director's name. But he's also done Mirai, which is out recently. I've heard that's very good. I haven't got to seeing that yet. Wolf Children's great. He also did The Boy and the Beast.
That is the film
That's
which
really good.
I am. Yeah, this is the film which I definitely have to watch before Christmas.
Oh yes,
And it does. I love archetypical stories and hero's journey, and it seems like it's something
quite
like
a lot of these films have been turning up on Amazon Prime. If anyone's got a subscription on there, Your Name and Boy and the Beast are on there. So I'd
brilliant.
recommend those.
So this is actually part of your research.
Distribution.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean the media, how the media technology is changing, and how actually the film industry and also the directors and the art is getting affected by these different channels.
Yeah, this is all being talked about mainly again, my research hasn't specifically touched on this, but a lot of the researches that we gathered for the books that I published last year, Cult Media and DVD and Blu-ray, DVD, Blu-ray and beyond, lots of them were focusing on the big talking point why lots of researchers are looking into this at the moment is Netflix, of course, shaking things up. They're always reporting that their subscriber numbers are growing year on year. Their stock price is hugely going up, and as a result, they're spending more and more money, which is where the questions start to arise on producing original content. And some of it is hugely popular, been winning awards. It's becoming must talk about and must watch TV. But some people have been questioning, really, okay, your budget is increasing year on year with how you're plowing money into this. What's the end game here? How can you for how much longer can you go on that financial model of just burning through all this cash to make original content? How much of a success story are you going to be? I mean, in some ways, it's undeniable the success they've been having. They've been attracting more people to that platform than, say, cinemas. Other cinemas and studios have been a bit worried about this, especially as Netflix have been buying up so much more talent to make for them movies as well as TV series. The most recent release to get talked about in this way was Roma, directed by Alfonso Cuarón, who did Gravity and Children of Men.
Yeah.
His latest film, Roma, which lots of critics have been loving, is a Netflix original release.
Wow. Is it already released?
Yeah,
It
it's
is?
already on
Oh, wow.
Netflix, and but what Netflix have also been doing, though, they've been realizing that the cinema still has some power, so they have been giving some of these films limited theatrical releases so that they can be nominated for more awards, but they're still trying to shake up the status quo in terms of this. Also leads into the theatrical window release schedules, because if you release a film traditionally these days, the infrastructure is mostly set up, you're at the cinema first, then you wait about 3 or 4 months. It can vary from country to country until you have the DVD release, and then shortly after that will be your digital releases, be on TV. So it's often known as the long tail, these other markets in which your film can make money further on down the line. People have been wondering how much that is being eroded away because there's so much of because of the technology we have now, there's so much of an instant gratification culture. People want this stuff now. So, but the big studios seem to be really against eroding that theatrical window, making it shorter between DVD and Blu-ray, even though there's a big argument to say that could help them in the long term to combat issues like piracy, just doing multi-platform releases. There's arguments saying people would still go to the cinema if they prefer that rather than watching it at home on, say, Netflix or pay-per-view through Amazon Prime or other services.
So Netflix has released quite a lot of films. I think Bright was one.
Yeah,
with
Bright
Will
was one of
Smith.
theirs. Yeah.
Outlaw King,
another
with
recent
Chris
one.
Pine, and then Roma.
Roma most recently with Alfonso Cuarón.
And then there was one with Natalie Portman.
Yes, that was earlier this year. Annihilation.
Annihilation.
Yes, I almost forgot about that.
One of the very weird films. They spent like 30 million.
They spent a lot there, and it was the again, really popular director there, who's mostly known for his scripts before he started directing. Alex Garland, I think, is the name. Wrote a few scripts for Danny Boyle, really good films, but also did before that Ex Machina, which is a really good sci-fi film.
He did Ex Machina?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Of course, yeah.
And Annihilation was an interesting one. I think there was outcry in America for this film to be in theatres as well as on Netflix, but it didn't happen in the UK. But I can proudly say that our students here at Greenwich decided to circumvent that, and one of them just logged into Netflix on one of the university PCs, and we played it on the big screen in the lecture theatre. It was a really good night.
Brilliant. I would plug in. I do get a chance to watch most of my movies on a projector. Yeah. So. Yeah.
No, I have a colleague in the department, Chris Nunn, who's very keen to do one of these podcasts as well for one time.
Perfect.
He has that at home as well. He loves watching his films on the projector big screen. I haven't got one set up in my flat yet, but I might look into it in future.
Definitely. But have you noticed any difference between the films who are made by Netflix and actually the films which are being made?
Well, there's not that much difference. I think some of them have been debated over in terms of quality, but that happens with week by week Hollywood releases anyway. So some of them have been critiqued, especially early ones. One of the first Netflix productions no one was quite sure why this was done, but it was a success in some countries, was Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon 2.
Oh, wow.
Which was several years that came out, about 15, 16 years after the original. That came out through Netflix. That was one of theirs. So there was some odd titles. Bright wasn't well received by critics, but actually got a lot of views on Netflix. It's been the same with Adam Sandler films. Adam Sandler's been contracted a lot for productions by Netflix recently. Again, lots of people will be wondering why these films have got really low scores on Rotten Tomatoes, but Netflix have been saying, nope, we've had lots of people watching them, so they know the formula that works, and now they're just trying to become more prestigious as well, because Netflix productions are starting to buy up talent like Alfonso Cuarón. I've mentioned Bong Joon-ho, very prolific Korean director, has made a Netflix original called Okja. I quite like that director and the films he makes. Okja is a good film. I wouldn't say it's his best film, though. I do like some of his earlier works. Who else was I going to mention? Oh, yes, the Coen brothers, also very recently. The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, that was a Netflix original, their Western movie. Wow. So they part of them burning through lots and lots of cash to make originals, they've been fueling that into a lot of their Netflix original series. But they seem to be more keen to build up their film catalogue now and get a lot more prestigious talent involved, because it's not just the names behind the scenes that I focused on, they're the directors. They're getting very prolific actors on screen, as you said, Will Smith, Natalie Portman, Chris Pine in Outlaw King, and the cast, the ensemble cast they have for Buster Scruggs as well. No
doubt that Netflix is really good with their series. I mean, they're definitely one of the best series or even popular series which they have created, like Mindhunters or Stranger Things. And many of the Netflix series, definitely they are much more quality-wise, and I would also say artistically, they give more freedom. That's what I've getting the report.
That's the appeal. But a lot of the research, again, dealt with in the cult media and DVD, Blu-ray and Beyond books that I co-edited, is saying... also saying that Netflix isn't the be-all and end-all. People are saying, oh, that's going to be the future. We're all going to be paying subscription services rather than our TV licenses and having TV sets in the future. It's not necessarily the case. If you look into research in the UK, we have the Broadcast Audience Research Board, BARB. You can visit their site, barb.co.uk, for free and see like weekly ratings and how they gather that data. And they do say a lot of people still just do watch their TV set and broadcast TV from week to week. The audience numbers also spike when there's live events being shown, which aren't shown on Netflix. Things like sports events, reality TV and talent competitions. Some must-watch TV. Recently, BBC series Bodyguard, which has been bought up by Netflix, but first of all, it was popular on broadcast television. It was a really big hit for BBC.
Which was the Bodyguard?
That was the one with... I forget the actor's name. He was in Game of Thrones.
Tom Hiddleston? Oh, no,
not Tom Hiddleston. Bodyguard was written by Jed Mercurio, who also did Line of Duty.
Okay. Yeah.
And sorry, again, I've forgotten that actor's name who's in it.
So I'm wondering, when you are saying that, of course, everyone is talking about how Netflix is going to actually sustain this kind of a model.
Yeah, because it's not actually the be-all and end-all. As I was saying earlier, there's competitors for Netflix. Amazon's doing a lot. I mean, it's massive in the marketplace for a variety of reasons, mainly being an online retailer, but it also provides music as well as its film and TV shows, and it has Amazon Studios as well. It's becoming more of a force in filmmaking and production. There's other streaming services becoming popular, like Hulu and HBO have their own service. Disney is going to be starting their own streaming service soon with their content.
So wouldn't these kind of services, when they are coming up and they are going to be making some quality films, tell us what kind of an audience and what kind of a society we are turning out to be if we are not willing to go to the cinema?
Well, that's the thing. The BFI have actually been reporting in the last couple of years that sometimes, in some years, cinema attendance has been increasing. So there's still a market for that. It's just, I think, for what types of films and audience tastes is changing. Obviously, the big blockbusters like comic book films or other big blockbuster franchises are always going to be popular year on year. The Marvel films are a really good example of that. And they draw people into the cinemas, but there's also an increasing number of niche audiences coming up, which helps highlight cinema going as well as consumption in other formats, because certain cinemas around the country or in either parts of the world still have a popular audience, a regular audience that goes along to them, maybe just to see something a bit different, like showing certain cult films or films that are re-released to celebrate a certain anniversary, or what's quite popular with some research that I'm aware of by Helen Kennedy and Sarah Atkinson. They're looking into live cinema events where you have themed screenings of a film. It might be screened in a weird, wonderful location, or they might recreate sets from the film when they go, when audiences pay their money to go and see the film. This happens a lot with Secret Cinema, which is a very popular event in London, but it's become so popular now the ticket prices are extortionate. So there's signs of cinema exhibitors and cinema chains diversifying with what they show, because media tastes are diversifying and increasing a lot. You see this with home media formats and what content is being offered by Netflix, Amazon and those competitors, but also in other forms of media consumption, like, as I said, TV viewing is still a big draw for certain audiences. And what I'm particularly interested in is also Blu-ray and DVD releases, because this is what a lot of my research is focused on with Japanese cinema, especially live action films. They haven't done that well recently at cinemas, even though there have been some recent successes because of big names, like at the moment in quite a lot of UK cinemas, Hirokazu Koreeda's Shoplifters is playing, because that won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, and he's he's become a very popular director from his earlier films. So there are few and far between Japanese films that have successful theatrical runs. And what I've heard from a lot of distributors that I've managed to get in touch with, people that I know at labels like Third Window, Terracotta, and some labels related to anime like Manga Entertainment and Anime Limited. Oh, and also niche labels like Arrow Video and Eureka, who are popular in the UK. They often find that Asian films, not just Japanese films, can struggle with theatrical releases, so they don't often go by that means. And also there's a similar disinterest with companies like Netflix and Amazon buying them up for their streaming services, even for just pay-per-view transactional video on demand, TVOD, it's often mentioned. So the go-to market that they have, the market where they can make a profit on for the releases of these films, is still Blu-ray and DVD. There's still an audience for those formats, even though certain newspapers, especially The Guardian, I've noticed some other critics and researchers saying this, The Guardian's at it again with articles like DVD is dead. It isn't. It's still drawing into the UK economy hundreds of millions of pounds worth of revenue per year. There's still statistics published by the British Association of Screen Entertainment and other related sources, institutions they're associated with, that says yes, it's a big money-making format year on year.
That is actually surprising, because you would, when I read the book and however much I could, it was very surprising to me that this kind of format is still one of the big ones, actually. So when I was thinking definitely that online digital content might be, because that is what we are using, and maybe our friends and the age group might be.
Lots of people are using it for reasons. I don't deny I do it too. It's convenient, definitely. We can access these things now on our smartphones, our tablets, our laptops. We don't even have to watch the TV set anymore if we want to, although there's an increasing range of plug-in devices, so you can, because these companies realise that that's still an appeal. So this is why you have your Google Chromecast, your Amazon Fire Stick, and things like that. So it is hugely convenient, and that's why more and more people are taking it up. But there's some problems with this format as well, with this digital culture that we're moving to. Things are quite temporary. With DVD and Blu-ray, you maybe do have to be careful with your discs to how you store them in certain scenarios, but in most cases, that's a format that you can go back to again and again. They won't wear out like VHS tapes. If you take good care of them, that film is stored in a certain format. The problem with online libraries like that Amazon have, I'm particularly aware of because I have an Amazon subscription, don't have a Netflix subscription, but I've heard of similar problems there. So those catalogues can change. Their rights deals can change with what films they have available. Or they might focus more on what's new and upcoming and aren't too interested in the older catalogues of films, which you find aren't available if you want something a bit different. It's very kind of temporary, this culture that's happening, and people think, I can watch anything you like. And actually, if you look more into the catalogues of these companies, they actually have less available than you might first think in terms of choice. Yeah,
that is actually really true, because I have some CDs from 2004, which I can still play. And they work perfectly fine. There are some CDs which I've backed up, and they are actually the cheap writable CDs which you just get to back up some of your data, and they're still working, although I do have it on my hard disk external. But still, the CDs are fine. Although you have mentioned, this is a very good property of we just having a physical copy of the thing, and also the choice of actually just picking it up and putting it on. The same issue with everything is on a cloud, or where this problem has been discussed even on a wider scale. So this is actually really fascinating. This has also been represented in the media industry, which is one of the largest consumption of CDs and DVDs.
Where I've also seen a really interesting illustration of this trend, even though we're in some people think we're moving more to this digital culture, but there's still this huge diverse range of interests and tastes in a variety of different media formats. Where I've seen a really interesting illustration of this is research that's been done into media piracy. Again, one of the authors of one of the chapters it's the Cult Media book that was published, Virginia Crisp, writes about certain pirates of Asian films, and what they like to brag about not what just films they have access to digitally, because it's not legitimately released in their country through a distributor, but they also like to brag when it's available. When a film is legitimately released on Blu-ray and DVD, they like to brag about their collections. They about what they have on their DVD shelf is very important to them. It's not just what they have in the digital realm. Equal importance to them is what they have on the DVD shelf. And some of these collectors take what is now known as shelfies, pictures of their collections that they're very proud of. So there's this huge interest in physical media and ownership, and having something long term, as well as the digital access to things, which is also convenient and also aimed for so much and appreciated so much in the current society we live in because of the technology.
And also you can have a connection to whatever you own a bit more better, because we still are not yet transferred our consciousness into VR, so we
haven't. Everyone talks about the digital revolution, but if you think about it, we're not quite there yet. We
are not. And we definitely have to think about what you have mentioned, the problem of losing what we have into the digital realm, and it could happen.
No, it could happen. No, there are more groups and institutions aware of this issue and doing a lot to archive what they can and preserve what we have, like institutions like the BFI, the East Anglian Film Archive that I know of back in Norwich, and lots of other archives set up around the world, trying to digitize and preserve what physical materials that we have, because we could lose digital storage of things in the future.
One solar flare,
exactly,
and a grid goes off, and a tsunami.
If you want to be really pessimistic about it, it could happen.
It has happened. So this is not something which is out of the blue. It actually be more in a way, very practical approach towards something which has happened already. In 100 years ago.
It's already scary, unfortunately, when you look at early film historians, and some of the warnings do come already from looking at early film history. We've already lost a lot. There's some statistics that suggest early films from like the 1910s or 20s, if not earlier, about 90% of those films are lost because they just weren't stored correctly on old celluloid film. And some filmmakers today working, especially people like Quentin Tarantino and Christopher Nolan, they say even though celluloid film is highly combustible if you don't store it right, it's still the best way of storing that medium, because it will still work through the projector no matter how long you keep it on a shelf somewhere. Some people say it's even better at preserving film at the moment than DVDs, but DVDs are still the go-to for a lot of people because they're just so cheaply available.
Well, Hitler died in one of the films, Inglourious Basterds.
Inglourious Basterds, in a projector theatre where they blew up all the celluloid. But despite that odd scene that it ends on, Tarantino is still a big fan of celluloid film.
That I can see that. I can see that happening. Brilliant. Is there anything else would you like to?
No, I think we've covered a lot. Thank you for your questions. Some of it is, as I say, my research is kind of a tiny area within these topics that we've talked about, but I hope to be touching a lot of those areas that we definitely started on, hopefully in the Zatoichi book, which is my latest work in progress to be started. I'd love to follow up on that on future when I'm further down the line with that book.
I love the story which you are working on already. There's a pull to it, and there's a lot of discourse around it, which I would love to talk about. It
sounds like a really niche category. I've been telling some of my colleagues about it, but I've been telling them one of the most recent hooks is to show the impact that Zatoichi's having is a couple of years ago there was the Star Wars film that was released called Rogue One, and Donnie Yen, famous martial arts actor, was playing a blind warrior. He did admit at the London Comic Con, which just happens across the river from here at the Excel Centre, he did admit in May 2017 that he was heavily inspired by Zatoichi. That is character.
Fascinating. Star Wars fans might kill me. I won't call myself a Star Wars fan, but
that's fine. You're welcome.
Rogue One is one of my Like,
Did
I
you really enjoy it?
Liked it.
Yeah,
That
I
was-
really enjoyed it too. I mean, I'm a big fan of the franchise.
Mm-hmm.
I'm aware of a lot of the criticism that The Last Jedi got, as well as praise, but I really liked it. But Rogue One, I thought was brilliant film. I really enjoyed it too.
Realistic.
Yeah.
And exactly. I mean, I wish I would have met you before, but then I wouldn't be fascinated now. But that character, it is like, well, that is fascinating. I think it would be amazing to see more of